You can accomplish so much more and a lot faster if you have help, if you have people operating in their genius and providing you with what you may lack or those people who may be able to fill in the gaps.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Because you're not in this alone. My guest today is a board-certified family physician and certified executive leadership coach. She is also the founder and CEO of Just the Right Balance, where she offers coaching, consulting, workshops, and training to help physicians and other healthcare providers transition into high-performing leaders. So thank you very much for joining us today. And now let's hear my conversation with Dr. Lisa Herbert. What an honor it is for me today to be talking with Dr. Lisa Herbert, who is coming to us from the Atlanta area. Lisa, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
And thank you, Randall, for inviting me to be a guest on your show. And I'm also looking forward to this conversation as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And what I would like to do is get us underway with your beginnings. And let's see if we can figure out how you arrived at where you are. And I know that you were born in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm curious where the idea to get into medicine came from. Was it a medical family or did it come from someplace else?
Yeah, so I would love to share my story with you. And you're right, I am from Brooklyn, New York. That's where I was born and raised. And the time that I lived in Brooklyn, I actually, for the first 5 years of my life, lived with my grandparents. So it's myself, my mom, my dad, and my grandmother and my grandfather. And unfortunately, at the age of 5, my grandfather, who I was very close with, had died of a massive heart attack. And we lived actually in the inner city of Brooklyn where I wouldn't say healthcare was limited, but certainly there were some, as there still are today, a lot of healthcare disparities. There were not a lot of doctors, who lived in our area. So my grandfather didn't receive the best of medical care. And I think that sort of, led to him having this massive heart attack at the age of 50. So it was from that incident that I knew as a little girl that I wanted to help people because I knew my grandfather didn't have the access to the healthcare that he needed. And I grew up in the inner city, again, where people were just pretty much, trying to make it from day to day. So I wanted to sort of, at the age of 5, I guess, give back, do something that mattered to help my community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So that was really the foundation. And, I started my journey of exploring sort of what being a physician would look like, starting at the age of 5.
Do you mind if I ask, you mentioned that you realized that there was a disparity in the way that people were served in healthcare. And even at that very young age, how was it that you became aware of that? How did you know that different people were getting a different level of healthcare?
Yeah. So I don't don't know if I realized that at age 5, but certainly as I started to evolve and become older and just sort of become more aware of my surroundings, I
Mm-hmm.
realized that, for instance, where I lived, the hospital was probably about, I don't know, 20 minutes away. So there wasn't really like a local hospital in the area.
Mm-hmm.
So even access for my grandfather to then be, escorted to the hospital at that time took time. It took some time for
Yeah,
the
I
ambulance
bet.
to get there. It took time for him to get to the hospital. So that was one thing. I also realized that for me, there weren't a lot of doctors at that time who served in our community, right? So there wasn't a community doctor.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of physicians or a lot of medical professionals at that time in healthcare who looked like me. So there wasn't a lot
Sure.
of diversity. So those are the things that I think, started to realize as far as the disparity is concerned.
And about how old were you, do you think, when that began to make sense to you?
So that began to make sense, I would say probably around the age of 10. And what
Wow,
started
that's
to,
pretty young. Pretty young.
yeah, what resonated at that age was I had then moved on. So I moved from the area in which I lived with my grandparents to a different part of Brooklyn. And then all of a sudden, I was surrounded by a doctor who did look like me, a doctor who was in my community, who was,
Mm-hmm.
serving people there, whose office was, a 10-minute walk. So there started to be these things that I realized weren't present 5 years ago, from what I could recollect, to,
Mm-hmm.
now starting to emerge and starting to really impact the community in a way in which it had not in those previous years.
Yeah. Were you always a pretty good student?
I was always very dedicated, in the books. I wasn't, one of those kids that sort of did a lot outside of school, going to school every day,
Mm-hmm.
coming home, reading and doing my homework. Very, I would say, I hate to use the word competitive, but I was very
Mm-hmm.
competitive at a young age, in the sense that I was always pushing myself to do better and to do more and to, get straight A's. So yes, I was always a very good student from what I could remember.
Did you feel different from your peers because of that?
Absolutely. I did. So where I grew up, obviously, as far as not only were there healthcare disparities, but there were educational disparities as well. So, the schools that I went to didn't have the updated, books and all of the maybe technology and some of the other things that schools that were not in the city had. And I was grateful and blessed enough to have parents who valued education, although they did not have a college degree and just finished high school themselves. They knew the value of education and what it meant in terms of being able to do better. So, and not all of the kids who lived in my area, were fortunate enough to have that. So I certainly
Yeah.
felt different in that sense. Yeah.
That had to have made a big difference, just the parental interest and the parental involvement. Were there other role models around who might have planted the seed in your head that there is something out there that's way beyond the world that you've grown up in, like a college education, or did that just spring up on its own for you?
Yeah, so I definitely had mentors. So one would be actually the physician that I talked about, right? That was in my community.
Mm-hmm.
So he was my own personal and my family physician. So he would always take time to talk to me about the importance of getting an education. I was curious about medicine, so he would always, try to give me as much inspiration, as much information as he could when I did see him. And then there was also an older cousin of mine who she was actually the first in our family to go to college. So she was actually my second cousin, and she became an educator. And I remember as a young child, she would sit me down and basically we would have, classroom sessions because she was just so encouraged about speaking. Yeah, she was
Outstanding.
so encouraged about teaching that she took me under her wings and, and basically became like my second teacher outside of what I was already getting, in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like by the time you finished high school, you knew that you were headed for a university somewhere,
Yes.
and it turned out to be Stony Brook. You want to tell us about how that came about?
Yeah. So, it's hard as a high school student in general, but then it's also, I think, harder as a student who really was the first, I'm going to say again, the first in my family to go to college because my parents
Sure.
did not. So I really didn't have say school to look forward to. There was no one who had an
Mm-hmm.
alma mater, right? There was no one who really
Mm-hmm.
sort of went through that process of what it meant to apply to college and all of those things. But I was able to have some really good, counselors in my school. I also had friends. So there was about 3 or 4 of us, and we formed a pack in high school. And we said we were all going to college. These are my girlfriends. We were all going to college. Each of us had different areas that we were going into, but all within the health field. So we all said we were going to college. And so we would basically just explore colleges on our own, read about colleges. My really good friend said that she was looking at Stony Brook because she was interested in pre-med at the time. And a friend of hers had told her how great the school was. It was close, it wasn't far from where we lived in Brooklyn. It was a nice campus. We would get to stay on campus. It was at that time, one of the inexpensive campuses, or colleges to apply to. There was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of support for New York students to go there, and they had a high rate of med school acceptance. So that really is what pretty much had me look at Stony Brook. And when I went to the campus, I fell in love with it. And and decided to make it my first choice. And the rest is history.
And did you find that the academic challenge was intimidating at all? Or was it just that you were accustomed to being a good student and it was actually not so bad?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think because I had the discipline of being a good student, that helped tremendously,
Mm-hmm.
especially, carrying on a pre-med curriculum, how intense and hard that is.
Indeed.
Um, but I think also the institution was challenging as well. But I think I was prepared for it in the sense that the high school that I went to, but it really prepared me for the rigor of college, which I was very grateful for. And so, so I think that it was just a really good fit for me.
And what was your undergraduate major, by the way?
So I actually majored in liberal arts with the
Yeah.
pre-med track. I was interested in other things outside of just the science and math courses that we obviously had to take to get into medical
Right.
school.
Yeah.
I actually loved writing. So English, I took a couple of English classes, which really served me really well. And so I loved the broadness of the liberal arts background.
Sounds like you did exactly what most medical schools say they want, and that is somebody with a well-rounded education.
Yes.
And so the next step was SUNY Upstate in Syracuse in medical school. Was that the only school that you applied to, or were there several? Or tell us about getting into medical school.
Yeah. So as as a college student, rather pre-med student, it's very stressful. Applying to medical
Just a
school,
bit,
just
yeah.
a bit, right? So you had to look at different factors. The where you what you wanted to hopefully maybe eventually study, where you wanted to go geographically, all of those things basically take into account the cost. And so basically I decided to apply to mostly medical schools in the tri-state area. So New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, because I knew I didn't want to be too far away from home. Hopefully, wanted to kind of stay, somewhat close. Try to stay within possibly the SUNY system, just because it had served me so well in college. So I thought, why not? Just apply there to those schools. So I ended up applying to, it's just such a long time ago, but I ended up applying to, I think, about 10 schools. SUNY Upstate was definitely at the top of my list. So was UMD&J. I actually went to a summer program at UMD&J as well, just to sort of get a little taste of what it meant to be a med student.
And that's the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was another school. Buffalo also, in upstate New York, was another school that I recall at that time. So when it came down to really choosing, SUNY Upstate was the first med school to say yes. I didn't have to go through a waiting list. I didn't have to go through anything else. They offered me a great package, wanted me to come. There was a pathologist there by the name of Dr. Threet. He was the dean of pathology, but he also was in charge of this program that he developed many years ago, which was to really kind of help to increase the number of minority physicians going into medicine. So I was really fascinated by his philanthropy as well as his ability to be able to create this program and to see the need. So it sort of ties back to what I was talking about in the beginning, which is, addressing those healthcare disparities. So when they said they wanted me, I think that was sort of it for me, but I definitely was still, I remember being on the waiting list for UMD&J, and I remember also being on the waiting list for Buffalo. But by that time, I had made my mind up that that's where I was going. So.
And once there, once the reality of your medical education was underway, did it seem daunting in any way? Did you find it terribly difficult, or was it just more of, this is just more education, and all I have to do is hit the books, and everything will be okay? What was the feeling?
I knew that I had, again, the motivation and the drive to really just put my head down and do what I needed to do to graduate. I think what became really daunting was the amount of information that we
the volume is incredible.
That we had to remember. So, I'm just thinking back to, oh gosh, all the courses where the textbooks were like thousands of pages long, and the semesters were shorter, the time to your first test was shorter, and all of the things that we were kind of used to in college just becoming just accelerated, 3-4 times. So that was the most daunting, for me, was the volume.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. You've done a lot of things
I have.
since you got board certified in family medicine. And what I think I'm going to do is let you list for us the highlights that you would really like to talk about, and eventually we'll find our way to the founding of Just the Right Balance. So what was it like stepping out of that residency program and decided, okay, I am a physician at last. What will I do next? Tell us the story.
Yeah. So, as my third year was coming to a close, I had realized that I loved practicing family medicine. I mean, I loved taking care of families. I loved the continuum of care. I loved being able to, hopefully in the future as a physician, see myself witnessing future generations under which I would serve as their family doctor. So as my third year was coming to a close, I had two opportunities. So one was to be a medical director for a family planning agency. So how that came to be was I had worked for them actually as a sort of as a third year, got to know a lot of the administrators there, really was interested in helping women in terms of not only just their health in terms of family planning, but also in terms of developing like a women's wellness center. So I think that came from just my experience of being a family doc. So it kind of just all came together. And I wasn't expecting to really go into a leadership position right out of residency. Nor was I really prepared. But I felt like it was something that I wanted to do. It was a challenge, It was.
Well, at that point, board certified family practitioners were relatively rare.
Yes.
It had not been a thing for very long. So I'm not surprised that you had the opportunity, and certainly sounds like you made the best of it. But I interrupt. You go ahead.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so it was definitely something, like I said, I wanted to definitely explore. It was a challenge. I really loved being, at the time, what I realized is that I really loved developing programs. I loved being, involved in things from the ground up. I wanted to make sure that all of the wealth that I was bringing as a family doc, that I was going to be able to help the organization to grow, right? And to
So you were a congenital leader, it sounds like.
Yes. It was the best experience. I was there for about 6 years. I was able to help them to build the center into what I would call like a comprehensive women's center. So not only did they, again, take care of a woman in terms of her family planning, but also they had a place now, women, and especially these women who did not have, most of them, health insurance, and or the ability to pay a lot of the times. So we were able to give them a place to go to for, screenings, mammogram screenings. We were starting to get them affiliated with surrounding institutions whereby they could get, if they were of the age, like colonoscopies done. We started doing colorectal screening. We instituted a midlife services program where we helped women who were going through, menopause and through the change of their life to help them to have a healthier lifestyle. So we were able to do a lot. And I was really, really happy with the outcome, really happy with the amount of services that we were able to give to the community.
Sounds like a really terrific resource for an underserved community like that.
Yeah.
And hats off to you for recognizing and being a part of it.
Thank you. And, so during that time as well, I still knew that I wanted to ultimately, have a practice and really set up an office, sort of like my mentor had in my own community, to have a
Mm-hmm.
family practice office. So, I was given the opportunity to take over the practice of a retiring physician in New Jersey who I knew through, I think it was through a friend that I became acquainted with him. Went to him a couple of times and he found out I was a doctor and he said, "You want to buy my practice?" Just like that.
Oh, my goodness. Sounds like he was ready to move along.
Yes. So I said, "Well, can we talk about it first?"
That's funny.
So we set up several meetings. I mean, he gave me the opportunity to come in and actually just work a couple of hours a week in his practice. He said, "I want you just to see what it's like, see if you like it, see if this is a practice that you want to grow, see if it's something that you want to do."
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely fell in love with it. It was the best decision at the time that I made, to have a already ready established practice that I could just kind of step into and grow.
Yeah, you can't beat that deal.
Yeah. And so that became my sheer focus for the next 15 to 20 years. I had a private practice. So I took care of infants. I actually at the time went to see newborns, in the nursery. They stayed with me, until they went on to high school and college. I had families, grandparents. I did a little bit of women's care, GYN, pediatrics, adolescent medicine, you name it. It was the ultimate in family practice.
Yeah, sounds like a dream come true.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I did for the next, like I said, 20 years or so
Pretty
until
close to
I
20
made the
years. Yeah.
decision, to transition into, the next phase of my career is what I call it.
And as I listen to this, and it sounds like you were in such a comfortable situation, it had to be a rewarding practice. And yet, clearly, you felt there was something else that must be done. So I can't wait to hear the next chapter of this story.
Yeah, absolutely. During my time in practice, what I started to realize was that, like you said, there is more that needed to be done. I was affiliated again with the university in New Jersey, UMDNJ, but this time I was affiliated with them as an associate professor. So I would have students come to my office. They would do 4-week rotations and just learn about, what it means to be a family doc and how do you, take care of patients in the office. So I was doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of community work, giving back, doing health fairs and giving some presentations in the school system. And through all of that, I think I started to realize that there was a lot more that I could give outside of my practice. And there was a lot more that I could do outside of just the one-on-one that we do, right, as practicing physicians. That coupled with, 20 years of practice and starting to really go through some burnout, actually, which I had, made me realize that, one, I had a great ride, in medicine, 20 plus years, learned a lot. It was very rewarding, but it was also probably a time for me to start thinking about transitioning and doing something different so that I could really start to utilize a lot of my leadership potential, as
Sure.
well as, do some things outside of medicine.
And I really don't want to take you astray of your path here, but I am really curious to know. I'm always wanting to know more about how people experience burnout. We were talking just a couple of minutes ago about this incredibly rewarding practice situation that you had, and yet you were feeling the beginnings of what seemed like burnout to you. Could you enlarge on that just a little for us?
Sure. I think for me, and I think everybody's story is different depending on their experiences and depending on the time period in which they practiced, right? So for me, I was sort of in that generation where I think medicine was just starting to change. So this is where we were going from paper charts to electronic health records.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where we're going from, one type of insurance to now having 30 insurance companies, where we're going from private practice in the traditional sense being the way that most docs practice to now practice is rather being acquired by hospitals and those sorts of things. So I think for me, a lot of it had to do with the change that was happening and sort of not being able to, or finding it difficult to, I would say, adapt to what was going on, having to deal
Hmm.
with those stressors, as well as just the demands of the practice. So with those changes, come more demands. EHR meant spending sometimes a lot more hours documenting.
Right.
The changes in learning how to bill now just became very overwhelming because this was like
Yeah.
how I fed my family, right? Was
Yeah.
through the income of my practice. So, and then just the volume of patients now that you have to kind of see to keep up. So that was adding
Hmm.
to it as well. So that on
Isn't it
top of,
crazy that
yeah,
that entering data into an electronic medical record could actually consume more time than writing out a note in longhand?
I know.
That's just so
It
crazy. And I
it
mean, I'm sure
is.
you dictated notes when you were when you were in your practice, but in my early years, we actually did write progress notes,
Yes.
and yet this electronic medical record that was supposed to make the charting procedure more concise and
Mm-hmm.
more reliable turned out to consume a tremendous amount of time, and it turned out to be nothing more than an electronic cash register.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I hear people talk about that a lot when the burnout conversation comes up. But again, I've unintentionally knocked you off your story. Where did you go next? Where did you move once you knew that private practice was not where you wanted to be?
Yeah. So I started to, spend some time thinking about what areas of medicine I could go in, what I wanted to do, where I might be most helpful. And I kind of went back to leadership. So at the time, I didn't quite know what that meant. I think that, looking back, I probably could have explored a little bit more about the transition that was needed to go into leadership, which kind of led me to just the right balance, but I'll get there. So in my quest to really start looking at taking on some maybe leadership roles, some non-clinical roles, right? That would take me kind of out of practice, but not out of medicine, but
Mm-hmm.
keep me still, in the throes of what was going on clinically, as well as being able to give back, but in a way that's a little different. So I took on some roles, as a physician advisor, where I worked in a large hospital setting in the case management department. So my role there was really just to help the hospital, to help the caseworkers to be able to improve efficiency in care in the hospitalized patients. So I took on that role. I was medical director for a local regional health insurance company, and that role was interesting because here I was on the other side, but starting to understand where physicians are actually needed in those areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how sometimes it's not really portrayed as a job or opportunity that might be something that would be accepted, but certainly necessary. So I spent some time there along with some of my other leadership roles in academia. And what I realized through all of that was that, yes, this was a nice way to transition out of clinical practice, but I didn't have the tools that I needed really to be the most effective in these leadership roles, right? Because I found myself a lot of times speaking up or trying to have my points made or my point, come across and feel like it wasn't being heard. So
when you say you felt you were missing the tools, are you talking about communication skills or simply not understanding the language of business, or just exactly what do you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the communication skills, understanding the business acumen of medicine, understanding the financial acumen of medicine. So understanding what
That's
a
pretty
budget is.
complicated,
Very
right?
complicated. Budgets, finances, how an organization is run. Not really understanding the corporate structure, basically,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what medicine is when we look at it, right? It is a business. So not
Yep.
understanding the corporate language, the corporate environment, how to work within a team, having to deal with some of my own, self-awareness in terms of things that I might not have even realized that I needed to know, or how I was acting or behaving in certain situations. I mean, I can go on, not understanding how to think strategically.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things are really important to be successful in a leadership role. And unless you receive the training necessary for that, and that doesn't necessarily mean going back and getting an MBA, although it could be,
Mm-hmm.
just receiving those training skills is really important for us to be able to be effective as physician leaders in those roles. And unless we come with that training, we don't really make an impact. And we don't really actually influence people to be able to kind of listen to us and follow us.
Which we don't. To my knowledge, there is nothing of that sort that is offered anywhere in medical education, either in medical school or postgraduate training.
Right.
So you make a very good point. So how did you get over that hurdle?
So I got over that hurdle by, one, getting my own coach, actually. So at the time, I didn't really know what a coach was. This was, years ago, obviously, when I was making this transition. And a friend of mine who was actually in finance recommended that to me. She said, "Why don't you get a coach?" And I was like, "What's a coach?" She's like, "Well, we have one." And it was, to her, it was like, "What are you talking about? We have one in our organization." Like, that our company hires a coach who comes in and helps us in terms of developing professionally and personally. We have access to a coach. And she said, "I think that, a coach would be helpful for you in terms of figuring it out. Like, are you on the right career path? Are you getting the resources that you need? How to ask for the resources that you need?" And so she gave me a recommendation. I took her up on it. I hired the coach, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made, because there were just things that I just didn't know. And the coach was able to help me. So from there, I think I just made sure that I took some leadership courses. Anytime there was a conference that, addressed becoming a more effective leader, whether that was communication, all the things that I mentioned, thinking strategically, financing and budget, I took those courses. I took a couple of courses through the American Association of Physician Leadership. I got my certification in coaching, and all of those things really helped me to realize not only what I was missing, but to help me become a better leader, but also to then think about, okay, how can I pass this? How can I move this forward? How can I pay this forward, right? And help other physicians who want to sort of do the same thing and may have a desire to go into leadership or might be in leadership already and just have a hard time finding their way.
I'm so impressed that every step along the way, when you make an advancement, the first question you seem to ask yourself is, how can I help somebody come along with me? That's so admirable.
Thank you.
So what happened next?
Yeah. So what happened next was, after I, got my certification in coaching, which I felt was important for me to have that, after I did the coursework and basically decided that this is my next step, this is what I wanted to do, I started, Just the Right Balance, which first, actually, my goal was to help women physicians balance work and family. But that quickly turned into helping physicians become better leaders so that they can maybe balance work and family through that. So I started to develop a coaching program, basically around ways in which I could help physicians I also became affiliated with some outside, I would say, consulting organizations who needed physicians to be able to step into that role as a coach, because who better are physicians going to really gel with is another physician who has already walked that walk.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been able to, sort of serve as that bridge, basically to help physicians in their current roles. So fast forward to today, I have a physician leadership academy, which is a 3-month course which helps physicians to develop those skills that I talked about so that they can become better leaders.
Is
It
this
gives
something that
them
you do in person, online? How does that work?
Yes, so it's online. So it's a course program curriculum online, as well as they get some one-on-one time with me as well, but it's all virtual. It's very easy to sort of navigate through. It gives the basic, what I call foundational skills that I think are necessary to help physicians in those roles. And so that's where a lot of my students will come through, and then some will just come to me for individual one-on-one coaching, because
Mm-hmm.
again, they're either in that leadership role and they need to be able to grow, in their career, or they might be looking to transition and saying, how do I even get a leadership role? And then how do I remain in that role effectively? How do I, influence others? And how do I make an impact? So through that one-on-one coaching, we will work together there.
Yeah. Are most of your clients sort of in that mid-career territory where they feel like, gee, something's wrong here. What am I going to do about it? Or do you have a good many people who come to you very young and say, I'm lost, help me find my way? What's the mix?
The majority are mid-career. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the majority are mid-career. And I think that's probably where they may start to feel a little uncomfortable, I guess I would say, in terms of realizing that there might be some next step that they're missing, or they may need just some guidance around how do I get there.
Well, it sounds like a great resource, and I'm sure you must be proud of it. The organization is called Just the Right Balance, LLC. And what do you think's next for you? Is this going to be the way you choose out the way that you close out your career, or are there other things on the horizon?
So I definitely want to grow this part of, my business, this part of my career. I want to really expand and really get into some organizations, and help them to develop their leadership programs if they don't have any already, and to help them to understand the importance of it. I also want to start to do more, and I am starting to do that now, more trainings inside of organizations. And that is, how do you develop a workplace that has a self-care and wellness? How you develop a workplace of diversity and inclusion? How you develop a workplace where you are excelling at patient engagement and customer service? So all of these things I think are really important to bridging the gap to the communities in which we serve. So I'm really looking to be that bridge and to help organizations to, become effective in their roles of serving others.
Well, Lisa, looking at your track record, you strike me as someone who is going to accomplish whatever you start out to accomplish. So I'm very confident that this is going to go exactly where you envision it to go. And I have really enjoyed hearing the story. Come to the part of the program that I like a lot. I like the best, in fact, and that's when I just get out of your way and let you talk. So, audience, I'm going to close my mic, and Dr. Lisa Herbert is going to deliver for us her personal prescriptions for success.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you my 3 personal prescriptions for success. So my first is, don't be afraid to ask for help. So as physicians, we are trained in an environment where we feel that we are supposed to have all the answers, that the buck stops with us, and that because we are often the ones in the room with the most clinical knowledge, that asking for help or not knowing the answer is a sign of weakness. Well, I now know that I could have saved a lot of time and frustration if I would have just asked for help. You can accomplish so much more and a lot faster if you have help, if you have people operating in their genius and providing you with what you may lack, or those people who may be able to fill in the gaps. So asking for help is a sign of personal and professional growth and maturity. And asking for help in my own career, as I had mentioned earlier, became really important when it was suggested to me that I get a coach when I was having a hard time dealing with the next phase of my life. And I thought that I could figure it out for myself, or that if I worked a little harder, I would get the results. But I didn't know that a coach at the time would have helped me. And I now know that that was the best decision. So at the end of the day, for me, asking for help really helped me to make the best decision. My second prescription for success is to have a life outside of work. So for me, I got married right out of my first year of residency, had my first child when I graduated for residency. So for years, it was all about work and family. I didn't make time for the things I enjoyed or for the things that kept me grounded. I didn't take time for self-care. It was all about giving and serving others. So that really did not help me to become a better person, a better parent, or a better doctor. I couldn't give to those I loved and served if my cup was empty and if I wasn't fulfilled. So I suffered burnout, as I talked about earlier, because of this and for various other reasons. But if I would have known then what I know now, I would have been more intentional about my own happiness and my own well-being. And then my last personal prescription for success is to trust your gut. Trust your inner voice. Take time to listen to that voice within. And that's that thing that we call our intuition. It will always guide you in the right direction. It takes into account all the data, all the facts, and all the experiences you've had, and it allows your mind to come to a decision. This was very clear for me in a case that I had when I was practicing of a young boy who had came to me with abdominal pain. I remember it clearly. He was 10 years old. He was very active, like most 10-year-old boys are. And the mom said that he was complaining on and off of abdominal pain. She said it was more on the right side, but yet he was still active. He was actually running around in my exam room. He was drinking and eating. There was no vomiting. There was no fever. So there was no textbook for anything, really. I examined him, and the only finding was some mild right lower quadrant tenderness. But there was something in his eyes. There was this gut that said, send him to the emergency room to rule out appendicitis. So the surgeon called me that evening and said, I don't know what made you send him to the ER. I was getting ready to send him home, but just because you sent him, I decided to do the CAT scan, and lo and behold, I had to operate on him. He's doing fine now, and he's going to be going home tomorrow. So ever since then, I began to trust my gut and let my intuition guide me, not only in practice, but also in other areas of my life. So these are my 3 prescriptions for success, and I hope that those will be helpful to the listeners.
That's great, Lisa. And I think if you were going to pick 3 and only 3, and of course I always tell people to tell us whatever they want to tell, but if you were going to pick 3 and only 3, I think you most definitely picked the best 3. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. I appreciate you being on the show today. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience where they can find you and find out more about you. So please share.
Yes, thank you so much. So your audience can find me on all social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, at Dr. Lisa Herbert. So that's Dr. Dr. Lisa Herbert, Herbert. They can also find me on my website at www.justtherightbalance.com. Anyone who would like to get in contact with me, there's a contact form on my website in which you can submit an inquiry, and I will get right back to you. So thank you so much for having me as a guest and allowing me to share my story.
Dr. Lisa Herbert, it's been a great pleasure having a conversation with you today, and we are so grateful that you joined us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today, and remember, you can always get more information about our guests as well as hear them face my rapid-fire questions at our Patreon site. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, and hopefully offer suggestions on what you'd like to hear in future episodes. Thanks very much also to Ryan Jones, who composed and performs our music for us. That's all we have time for today, so please be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.